Hi guys, and welcome back to week 2 of the latest series where I'm attempting to build and paint 2,000 points worth of Adeptus Mechanicus in just 4 weeks. In week 1 last week we built and primed all of the models, and now my thumb has recovered from the hobby knife, it's time to get some paint on them. This week is Infantry week. We have 40 Skitarii split into 30 Vanguard and 10 Rangers. Now, for ease of painting, and because the man in the shop sold it really well, I'm going to be trying out contrast paints for the first time. Because they are much more transparent, contrast paints are a great way of getting highlights and shadows in from the get-go, using the base coat. So I started with a very aggressive zenithal highlight of white over black, just out of a rattle can because I don't have an airbrush. Then I applied a single coat of Citadel's Warp Lightning contrast paint on all the Vanguard coats. This, because it's such a harsh contrast, really showed the highlights and the lowlights exactly like I wanted them to. For the Rangers, however, I applied several coats of thinned Cayman green to give them a darker tone of green, reminiscent of their more stealthy nature, whereas the Vanguard aren't really going to be too concerned with stealth because they're just going to run up the field. At least that's how it works in my head. The biggest challenge I had here was one of just pure volume. So with so many models to paint, I needed to really get through as many in one coat as possible, which is another reason I chose the contrast paint. And overall this initial base coating took me about 3 hours, and then I highlighted using dry brushing of Warp Green before applying a thinned layer of the contrast paint just to smooth out the transitions. I really like how this end result was turned out on the Vanguard, and for the Rangers I just did a wash of Agrax Earthshade and then re-dry brushed with Cayman Green with a little bit of white in to bring up some highlights. Next it was time to move on to the metallics. I really wanted to do a dark metal look here with a blue tone, similar to the Grey Knight's blue but a bit lighter. I really like the look of this colour in general and how it works with the greens, so to get this I mixed 1 part Vallejo Air Silver with 1 part Scale 75's Huldra Blue and a very small drop of white to keep it quite light. I chose to use Vallejo Air Silver, particularly using the Air line of paints, because it's a pre-thinned metallic and so would keep its pigmentation without me having to thin it down myself, which can sometimes be a bit iffy with metallics. It's also much lighter than if I were to use lead belcher or gunmetal, and because I was applying a very dark wash, which I use Citadel's Drakenhalf Nightshade, which really darkens it down and brings out the texture and shading super easily but retaining the metallic sheen. Now with the majority of the base colours done, it was time to move on to more of the detailing work. For the wood, I used a mix of Vallejo's Beastie Brown, Terracotta, and a drop of black to create this dark mahogany kind of colour for the rifles. I applied this to all of the stocks on all of the guns, and once this step was done, I went through them again, this time hitting the barrels with black, and then some lead belcher on the trim, particularly on the end of the Vanguard's barrels. Finally, it was time to bring the minis together and really finish them off. So I used Balthazar Gold and I hit the remaining coils and rotatory bits on the guns. For the Rangers, I hit all of the metal brocade, I think the word is, the embezzled detailing on the stocks of the guns, and then the center Mechanicum symbol in their chest. This really works well with the blue. The gold and blue go together brilliantly. And then it was pretty much done. There was just a few bits of detailing I did to stop them all looking the same, so I picked out some details in silver, some in gold throughout the minis, and it was time to base after finishing the purity seals. This took me the longest step. This took me about 6 hours in total, just because it's finicky little details. And then for basing, I was using Citadel's Martian Iron Earth, and I have to say I was very disappointed with how this turned out. I really struggled to get the cracked, earthy texture that I wanted. Hopefully I can figure out a better way to do this for the next week. With this week completed, we now look towards week 3, where I plan to do all the headquarters, and the Skitarii destroyers. I expect this week will be the hardest, as I plan to spend significantly more time on the characters than I did on just the infantry units. So if you don't want to miss that, then hit the subscribe button. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to let me know in the comments and leave a like if you want to. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next week.